Good morning and welcome to our second Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility webinar series. Today is on mobility as a service and how you can connect all your transportation solutions in one place. We're excited to have some speakers to get us up to date with what's going on with shared mobility and mobility as a service around the country right now, and some projects that may be of interest. But I also want to tell you a little bit more about background on our webinars and what's coming up in the future. So this series has been launched by the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Program to help increase knowledge of shared mobility technologies and services, and to help you think about ways that you might be able to integrate that into projects in your own community. And it's a platform for knowledge sharing. We'll be doing this as a monthly webinar series. So second Wednesdays of the month at 11 a.m. is our normal meeting time. And if you received an invitation today, you will continue to receive invitations to these until you decide you don't want to. You can just let me know. Our next webinar will be January 13th at 11 a.m. and it will be on mobility hubs, and we'll have some speakers from Minnesota, some of the projects that are happening both in St. Paul and in Minneapolis, as well as some other projects around the country, including the Smart Hubs project in Columbus, Ohio. And if you have a staff member or somebody else you think who might be interested in this series that would like to join us, please feel free to email me, elliott.mcfadden@state.mn.us, and I will be happy to add them to the invitation list. The format today, we're going to have two presentations on mobility as a service and what's happening around the country. And then I will end with telling you about two exciting projects that are in the works for Greater Minnesota. We will have a Q&A at the end, and everyone, for the time being, will have microphones turned off. So if you've got a question, if you can go ahead and put that in the chat box as you think of it. And we may go ahead and turn on microphones at the end to have a discussion if we need a little bit more information. Let's see. Also, we did notice in the last webinar there was a little bit of a delay for some people in slides showing up that had to do with the connection issue. So if you see a little bit of a delay, don't be concerned if it takes a minute for slides to move over and the speaker seems to be talking on. We will also be sharing all of the slides on the website as well as the recording. So if you miss anything, you're welcome to go back and take a look at it. If you are having any bandwidth issues, also another way you can help with that is turning off your camera. So that does help address some bandwidth issues. And so with that, if there aren't any questions, we will go ahead and move forward with Adam Cohen, who is with the University of California at Berkeley and the Transportation Sustainability Research Center. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on with mobility as a service in the United States today.
Thank you, Elliott, for the introduction and for the opportunity to participate in this webinar today. Can everybody see my screen? Because I can't see you guys when I have PowerPoint full screen.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, terrific. Well, wonderful. Well, I'd like to start out by kind of talking a little bit about kind of mobility on demand and kind of the role of public-private partnerships. I'm going to kind of talk about kind of what is going on in the U.S. and kind of how it differs a little bit from mobility as a service in Europe. Talk about kind of state and federal roles and kind of how those are evolving. What's going on in the industry kind of in light of COVID, and then kind of talk about some indicators to watch, some kind of unanswered questions, and then conclude with some additional resources. So fundamentally, mobility on demand is really about kind of the commodification of passenger and goods mobility. And so what this means is that, consumers are making decisions on demand based on, travel or delivery time, cost, convenience, and other factors. And, we saw this pre-COVID, but I think even more pronounced now. We're seeing kind of goods delivery and even digital delivery of services playing into this decision-making of whether or not to make a trip or to have a good or service delivered. We've seen this, for a number of years now, and fundamentally, what MaaS is about user-centric mobility. And the US DOT's philosophy behind this is really about kind of leveraging MaaS through kind of connected consumers to manage kind of supply and demand of the transportation ecosystem. So it's more than just kind of on-demand mobility. It's more than just kind of integrated fare payment or real-time information, but it's about the entire connected ecosystem or kind of IoT of transportation. So as part of this, it can include things such as incentives, smart parking, and other kind of real-time data services, and really trying to influence kind of supply and demand of the transportation network. So across the country, what we see is kind of really 4 types of common mobility on-demand partnerships. We see kind of first and last mile connections to public transportation. We see low-density service meant to kind of fill spatial gaps in kind of the transit network. Late-night service meant to kind of address temporal gaps. A lot of partnerships around kind of paratransit for either older adults and or people with disabilities, and trying to kind of use MaaS to kind of fill mobility gaps or enhance mobility either through improved paratransit service, such as more on-demand service, and reducing kind of pre-booking times, or even augmenting paratransit, trying to kind of triage where riders go and the types of services they have available to them to provide a more customized experience based on kind of personal ability and specific mobility needs. And then we see a variety of other kind of partnerships that are kind of emerging, and as Elliott kind of mentioned, and as we see kind of in Minnesota experimenting with FTA's new AIM and IMI programs, we see a lot of experimentation around rural transit. And I know, Caroline is going to talk about that momentarily, and that's kind of a growing area of space. On the right here is kind of this common engagement planning and implementation model that we've really seen across these growing number of partnerships and pilots. Where first, public agencies are kind of selecting a partnership type. They are right now doing a lot with subsidies or risk sharing, establishing goals and data needs, selecting partners, and then they're going through this implementation process where they're marketing it, collecting data, kind of adjusting the pilot, and based on the evaluation, deciding either to continue the pilot, either make it a formal agreement, or in some cases canceling it if it's determined it's not operating as intended. This figure here just kind of depicts the partnership types in mobility on demand pre-COVID that we saw across the country. And you can see the vast majority of these tend to be first mile, last mile partnerships, but there's also some low density, a handful of late night, and some paratransit partnerships across the country. The vast majority of these in the Northeast, California, and across the Sun Belt, but we do see some kind of growing activity in other locations, including the Midwest. In contrast to kind of what's going on in Europe with mobility as a service, mobility as a service really kind of differs from MaaS in that it really kind of focuses more on and really kind of about an app where kind of public transit is at the heart, and developing kind of integrated fare payment and real-time information services coupled with booking and ticketing as part of that. And so in Europe, there's approximately 2 dozen mobility as a service apps mostly in Europe, but also some of them globally. But the ability to kind of really kind of purchase a bundled package that includes shared mobility is still really rather limited to a handful of service providers such as WIM and UbiGo, which are depicted on the right here, showing kind of WIM. In the U.S., we see kind of a growing role for both the state and federal government in this regard. At the federal level, we see really renewed interest in kind of policies and guidance and recommended practice related to MOD partnerships, and that we're seeing a lot of this coming out of the MOD sandbox, lessons learned. We also see development around equity and inclusion, both at the state and federal level, and policies to kind of enhance access for underserved communities. And then a growing role as part of the COVID response. At the state level, we see a lot more kind of hands-on activity at the state and local level related to public-private partnerships and encouraging fair and information integration. An example of this from the state of California is known as the California Integrated Traveler Project, known as CalITP, which is really kind of geared towards implementing a statewide standard for integrated fair payment across the state of California. We also see a lot of renewed interest at the state level related to equity and accessibility as well. And then also practices related to curb space and rights-of-way management. So I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of how COVID is kind of impacting kind of these shared mobility partnerships with public transit. First, the American Public Transit Association is estimating, approximately a 75% reduction in fare box revenue, and this corresponds with approximately, on average, a 70% or so reduction in public transit ridership, which is just kind of shown here on the right based on kind of Move It data. We're seeing across the board, reduced routes, operating hours, and suspended fare collection in some cases to reduce kind of contact either with drivers or contact surfaces. And this has kind of caused renewed interest in kind of seeing how the private sector could help fill some of these gaps. But, and then the other piece of this is that, research on kind of COVID transmission in public transit is also mixed and I think still emerging. With respect to kind of for-hire services, we're seeing kind of the suspension of pooled rides, dramatic usage declines, and, a lot of uncertainty over labor policy across the country in terms of, whether drivers are classified either as independent contractors or as employees. And we're also seeing kind of growth in goods and food delivery and kind of repurposing of curb space. A little bit kind of about kind of what we see in the micromobility space. We're seeing a lot of renewed interest in micromobility, services that are being kind of classified as essential, repurposing curb space and rights of way through policies such as slow streets, and kind of dedicating this to micromobility and other commercial uses of the curb space. Early indicators suggest that micromobility is growing as a mechanism of kind of maintaining social distancing, and that users are actually making longer trips on micromobility, possibly to substitute for trips that they were previously making either on public transportation, with Uber and Lyft or other modes. A little bit kind of look at kind of what we kind of anticipate kind of post-COVID. It's no surprise that a lot of employers are looking at either part-time or full-time telework kind of post-COVID. There are some early indicators to watch that I think are really important in the context of what we see in Minnesota potentially, both with the Twin Cities as well as rural communities. If we look at kind of National Association of Realtors data, they're showing increasing home sales, improving affordability because of falling interest rates, and a sharp increase in new home sales, which is only being limited by supply constraints. We also see that through their work, they've done a lot of look at kind of what are telework-ready communities, and their work really shows that telework-ready locations tend to be highly suburban and highly exurban in nature. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And then with the COVID recession, we see a different dynamic that we haven't seen in prior economic recessions, and this is predominantly the fact that the folks that have been impacted with job layoffs predominantly are at the very low end of kind of the economic spectrum, and those that are working still and have been able to telework have shown kind of increases in their discretionary income, in part because they're not traveling, they're not spending money on leisure activities, going to the theater, going out to dining, and so we see some kind of potential shifts in consumer spending towards durable goods, such as buying a vehicle potentially, improving a house, or even buying a home. And so I think all of these raise some real important questions in terms of what we can kind of see post-COVID in terms of transportation behavior. We've also seen a lot of major employers announce that they are leaving urban centers and they are moving either to different parts of the country or to more suburban locations. And so I think this kind of raises in terms of what this means for urban centers going forward, and could it mean a real growth in suburban or even rural communities? So some unanswered questions really are kind of, will households be organized? Kind of long-term, consumers kind of resume brick and mortar retail, after the health crisis. What happens if the vaccine is either ineffective or people refuse to take it? How do we build kind of trust and confidence in public transportation and keep it solvent? When do we start rolling back social distancing measures, and to what extent do we start doing that? And how do we continue to make sure that we serve disadvantaged communities in the face of essential service cuts that we're seeing across the board? So I'd like to kind of conclude by just kind of sharing some additional resources. We've done a number of primers on mobility on demand and shared mobility for the U.S. Department of Transportation and the American Planning Association. Many of these resources are available on our shared mobility resource page, available at innovativemobility.org. In addition to that, there's also the COVID Mobility Works resource page that is sponsored by the World Economic Forum at covidmobilityworks.org. And I'd like to conclude by thanking MnDOT and our research partners for kind of supporting our work, for the opportunity to present today, and I've included my contact information below. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That was very helpful, and a lot of new information that we're hearing, especially with COVID, to be thinking about. We're going to move to our next speaker, but again, wanted to remind folks that if you have questions or comments or anything that you want to share as you're thinking about it, you can put into the chat box or conversation box. If on your control panel, that's going to be the little, looks like a little thought bubble, like a cartoon. You can click on that and put in a comment. Okay, now we're going to hear from Dr. Carolyn Rodier, who is at University of California, Davis, and at the Institute of Transportation Studies, and is going to share with us a project that I think has a lot of insight as we're looking at mobility as a service, especially in more suburban and rural areas. And so with that, I am going to take over and help drive as you speak. So take it away. Oh. I cannot hear you. Let me Huh.
I'm sorry, I forgot to turn my mute off.
Okay, as the driver of this, I usually am able to do that for you, but for some reason it wasn't letting me do that. So go ahead. It has gone mute again. Let's see.
Is it working now?
Yes, I think I may have accidentally hit mute. May have, when you turned back on, I might have muted you again, but I can hear you now. Okay, okay, we're good.
So we try one more time? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So this is the Ecosystem of Shared Mobility project in the San Joaquin Valley. And this is a case study that shows how mobility as a service can link people and their travel needs to multiple integrated mobility services. MaaS is, starting to become a backbone of a system of expanded mobility service in the Valley. And I'll explain that throughout the presentation today. Okay, so overview. I'm going to briefly describe the San Joaquin Valley, the problem motivating the project, the background on the community-based planning study used to develop the project, and finally I'll conclude with a discussion of our MaaS systems and next steps. Okay, California's San Joaquin Valley. Of geographic background here. Okay, so the San Joaquin Valley, it's also commonly known as the Central Valley, but the Central Valley includes Sacramento, where I live, and for purposes of this case study, we exclude that area. The San Joaquin Valley is California's single most productive agricultural region, and it's one of the most productive in the world. It produces more than half of the fruits and vegetables and nuts grown in the US. And in this map, you'll see that the valley is dominated by agricultural lands. The smaller pink area are residential and commercial lands. Next slide, please. So California has classified most of the San Joaquin Valley as an economically and environmentally disadvantaged areas. It has some of the worst air quality in the nation and high rates of childhood asthma. Okay, next slide, please. Our project focuses on the problem of access, poverty, and emissions in the valley. So I typically, I know that a lot of you are all familiar with these challenges, but I'm frequently talking to kind of urban-centric policy people, so I like to put this in. So just to center our discussion, but the challenge to rural transit service is really dispersed development patterns and long travel distances that lead to low transit ridership and low fare box revenues. I know you're all familiar with these issues, and then ultimately service cuts. So for rural households living in poverty, low levels of transit services and relatively high cost, I'm sorry, please, next slide, please. And relatively high costs of personal ownership contribute to low access to opportunities. Okay, next slide. So in general, long travel distances and lack of alternatives to the personal vehicle can lead to increased levels of auto ownership, vehicle miles traveled, and then greenhouse gas emissions, which is a big concern in the state of California. Next slide, please. So in California, legislation requires that metropolitan planning agencies, or MPOs, develop land use and transportation plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Valley, originally when this project started, actually, can we go back a minute? Was urged to develop plans and measures typically applied in major urban areas. For example, fixed route transit expansion, and then transit-oriented development where you're increasing the concentration of development around this fixed route transit. The Valley, however, was concerned about the efficacy of these kind of quote-unquote urban measures in a largely rural region. They wanted to draw on the sharing economy and new technology to find really a middle path between fixed route transit and personal vehicle ownership, one that would reduce cost and increase access to citizens in their community. As a result, a planning study was conducted to examine new technology and shared mobility services to try to meet mobility gaps and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, next slide. So UC Davis led a community-based planning effort in partnership with the Valley. This included stakeholder engagement, focus groups, and data analysis. Problems were inventoried by location and included intercity transit gaps. We identified high-cost transit routes, also services with low fare box recovery, and also communities that had low vehicle to adult ratios. We also identified and evaluated new technologies and shared mobility alternatives that looked promising at the time. Okay, next slide. So at the conclusion of this study, we identified 3 pilot concepts for implementation, and we secured the financial support. We secured financial support from California's low carbon transportation funds to implement these pilots, which included an electric vehicle car sharing service, an electric vehicle car sharing service and affordable housing in the southern San Joaquin Valley. The pink areas are the rural site locations. A mobility as a service platform in the Northern Valley in San Joaquin and Stanislaus County, and then a volunteer ride-sharing service that served the areas highlighted in pink. And these are highly disadvantaged rural areas with extremely low transit service. The MaaS platform was really envisioned to kind of knit existing and new services together as they begin to expand throughout the Valley through other seed grant projects through the Low Carbon Transportation Fund. Okay, so this is, next slide, this is our Mio car service that's located in Tulare and Kern County. Vehicles can be rented for $4 an hour and $35 a day. The goal here is, again, to provide car sharing at a price point that's more affordable than owning a vehicle, again, to our highly price sensitive populations in communities with very low transit access. So, you know, we're really vehicles, this service to see if we can kind of help people avoid the purchase of their second vehicle. You know, we created a new nonprofit. It wasn't very easy to recruit for-profit car sharing in these types of communities, but we have created the nonprofit, and it's operating. It's been operating for almost a year now. However, this organization was developed under the guidance of, you know, mobility development. They provided the technical assistance necessary for the local nonprofit. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is Vogo, our volunteer ride sharing service. This offers free rides to residents in rural disadvantaged areas, again in Stanislaus and San Joaquin County, when transit's not an option. So as you know, when the volume of rides grow, we're able to load a lot more people onto the rides. So we'll have increased ride sharing. That's not possible right now with COVID. However, you know, we're laying the ground for this service. We're hoping post-COVID we'll be able to start, you know, doing more ride sharing again. So volunteers provide rides with their own vehicles, and they're reimbursed at a per mile IRS reimbursement rate. A local nonprofit moves, recruits and trains the driver. And again, we're partnered with, you know, someone who knows how to operate these services, the Volunteer Transportation Center. They operate a high volume volunteer service in upstate New York. They provide the back office dispatch, scheduling, and routing services. So again, it's kind of a partnership between technical assistance and a local nonprofit. Reservations are made up to 2 days in advance via our MaaS system. Okay, moving on to discuss our MaaS system. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is, I'm going to kind of discuss MaaS in terms of how we developed our working definition for our specific project. So there are lots of definitions of MaaS, and this was kind of our working concept. But so we come from it as, you know, these are the key questions that we want our MaaS system to answer. What is the best way to get from A to B by time and cost? When will my ride arrive? Is there space available? Can I reserve a space? And then can I pay now? Okay, this is, next slide, please. This is our system perspective of MaaS. This platform integrates different services and their data. A smartphone app is the interface between answers and questions. Okay, next slide. Okay, how do computers communicate? This is a huge issue for our MaaS platform. MaaS platforms need to communicate with mobility services and platforms via APIs and data. We found that many service providers don't want to connect to MaaS platforms because of concerns about competition, protecting software secrets, and sometimes just the lack of an existing API. So if there's an existing service contract, it's really tough to get them to connect to a MaaS platform. If the service provider is willing to connect to the MaaS system, because there are no standard APIs and data structure for integration, each integration is an expensive one-off that can range between $10,000 to $30,000 just on the MaaS side, not on the other service side. So because of these challenges, you know, we recommended early on in our process that our program partners require contractual agreements and some contracts that will allow us to integrate and pay for the integration with the MaaS services. And I'll show you one example of how this kind of paid off for us. Next slide, please, later on in the presentation. So today in the US, private companies such as Uber and Lyft use MaaS apps to promote their mobility services. In some major urban areas, transit is included in the app. Users, they want to, my understanding, this could be outdated, I'm not sure, I'm sure Adam can correct me on this, but it's not possible to plan a trip with a combination of services in the US. For example, if you take an e-bike to transit and then take ride hailing for your entire trip from A to B. But we're working on it, and I know a lot of other people are working on this as well. Okay, next slide. So our vision is really a public MaaS. So sorry about that. Thanks for forwarding it. In contrast to the open public MaaS model, we would like to include all available services. So to combine to provide more choices to more destinations and to minimize travel time and costs given specific user needs and preferences. So we see it as a public-facing platform that may lower barriers to market entry, especially to small local providers, and increase service supply and cost with more competition. MaaS also enables the creation of individual accounts and codes that allow for promotions and easy applications of subsidies for special groups. I know there's increasing discussions of these days of, you know, allowing some kind of mobility wallet as part of these apps. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Uh-oh, are we frozen? Elliott?
No, I'm on Vamos short-term goals.
Yes, perfect. Okay. So I just described our big picture vision of MaaS. However, we had to focus on what we thought were realistic goals in the short term. And these included integration of transit services across transit agencies and between fixed route DRT and VOGO, reservations for VOGO and DRT, and streamlined payments and subsidies. Okay, this is what we're able today, what VAMOS allows, and I'll provide you with some illustrations later. Transit planning across 14 transit agencies in the San Joaquin and Stanislaus County, with turn-by-turn walking instructions and real-time arrival information when it's available. DRT is linked to fixed route transit. There's information on how to reserve DRT, demand responsive transit, but not direct reservations. Reservations for VOGO, however, are now enabled. And we also were able to include separate bicycle planning. Okay, next slide. Okay, these are the transit agencies that are included in the MaaS application, the local and regional agencies. Okay, so now moving on to, I'm gonna try to get you, let's see if I can, let's see, I can't see the big screen.
I'm on the local transit and regional agencies involved.
Okay, yes, can we do the next slide, intercounty transit trip planning?
Yep. And I've hit the play button.
Okay, I can't see your screen. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So you've hit the play button. I'm just not seeing it anyway. So this video shows an intercounty transit trip from Stockton to Modesto. These are the two major cities in Stanislaus and San Joaquin County. So here you can see the little Wi-Fi icon, that's real-time transit. Trips can be planned currently or in advance. Okay, this is pretty slow. I don't know if we're gonna, this is the turn-by-turn instructions. And I think and so you can see this links San Joaquin, a train trip, to a bus trip. Okay, I think we can stop this one now and go to the next slide. Okay, if you can start it. I'm still seeing intercity county transit trip plan. Yeah, here we go. This is
Riverbank to Modesto?
Yes.
Okay.
So this slide will show you how the model represents a deviated shuttle, bus with real-time information, and a walk combination. Let's see. And you'll also see bike route directions. Okay, again, the little Wi-Fi icon is real-time information. This is Flex, so they tell you how to, gives you a phone number to call to reserve the trip. And again, we can go to the next slide. Again, we had to do this sort of phone call thing because we were not able to integrate directly with the company that provided the dial-a-ride service or the microtransit service. So VOGO, this will show us VOGO reservations. So that's Oakdale, rural, Stanislaus County to French Camp. It's kind of a in San Joaquin County. Okay, so they're showing you right here that you can take VOGO. The other options are extremely long trips. VOGO will only pop up when your transit option's not viable. It'll take you over an hour and a half to get there. So the ride is free. So you just confirm your reservation through this. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. Okay, we've got a little video here. This is.
I'm going to need to change my screen share for just a second.
Okay, I can give a little information about this. Yeah. So I'm going to show you a little video. We've integrated now transit payment in San Joaquin County only for, I believe it's 7 transit agencies. This is kind of gives you a partial sense of what's going on. We haven't done one of our screenshots. However, you can go into Vogo, and if you have an Easy Hub account, you can just go on and click it. If you have an Easy Hub account, it'll allow you to reserve, just like you can reserve a Vogo trip. So I'm just going to conclude with next steps for VAMOS. With funds from in 2020 from FTA's Innovative Mobility Initiative, we plan to, standardize payment integration and demonstrate the integration in Stanislaus County. So we'll have payment integration not only in San Joaquin County, but also Stanislaus County. We're going to test a wide range of marketing strategies using QR codes. That's a big issue for all our partners right now. They're very excited to have this type of funding for our project. We're going to evaluate the feasibility of implementing MaaS with a rural collective in the San Joaquin Valley. And then we're going to try to address the cost of implementing MaaS for rural communities. The cost is reasonable for major cities, but it's more of a challenge in smaller rural communities. However, sharing these costs across a large number of smaller communities may be feasible, and we're going to look at this in the Valley and how to set up some kind of structure. And then with funds from the California Sustainable Transportation Equity Program, again, this is the low carbon transportation funds. We're looking forward to integrating new bike sharing and car sharing programs in Stockton, and hopefully existing ride hailing services. That would require getting the Uber and Lyft to agree to integrate with our MaaS platform, and we'll see how that goes. We also want to provide trip planning and payments for combination of modes. We're going to work on making progress in that area. And then we are also going to add personal accounts to enable, subsidies for very low income households or mobility wallet, subsidies that can be used to pay for some of these new access services. Okay, next slide. And I just want to give a shout out to all our project partners. This is a big project, and every one of them makes a huge contribution to what we're doing. And then I just can conclude with the last slide and say thank you all. And if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to talk to you. And you can email at that address. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I think what that project is going to transition very nicely to the discussion about, I'm going to do a quick presentation on the MaaS projects that we are going to be having going on in Greater Minnesota, which I think have some of the same challenges and issues that the San Joaquin Valley project has. And I'm going to give folks just a really quick overview so we have time for a little bit of questions at the end. We will just know that these are projects that are in planning right now, and we will plan to have future webinars with a lot more detail once these projects get into implementation. So the first project was a IM Integrated Mobility Innovation Grant from FTA for Arrowhead, the Arrowhead Economic Development Entity, and Arrowhead Transit. And it is focusing on mobility as a service with goals of helping to provide first mile, last mile connections with public transit, integrating all of the local options available into a one call, one click. Also looking at how you deal with payment for unbanked and underbanked passengers. It will also, there's a big connection with doing scheduling and trips for wellness centers and other kinds of social services. And how do we meet the needs that we can't do right now with transit for rural and deeply rural passengers? The 5 areas that are going to be developed in the technology side is a passenger app, dispatching platform, fleet driver app, an enterprise booking center, so allowing that kind of integration with payment, and administrative dashboard. And the transportation partners, the volunteer driver program there, Hermantown Bus Service and Duluth Transit Authority, in addition to Arrowhead Transit. And there'll be a lot of work as well integrating with the different health and wellness partners that are available on the ground, as well as social services. So again, that's a very, very brief overview. I'm going to jump now to the second project, and just know that once we get into implementation, we'll come back and probably do a whole webinar just on Arrowhead alone. So the second project is being led by MnDOT. It's the Southern Minnesota Mobility as a Service project, and there we are looking at building a single platform that provides access to all shared mobility options within an area, allows trip planning, payment, and real-time updates on trip information. And this was funded through another innovation fund, Accelerating Innovative Mobility, or AIM, that was through the FTA, and we received that funding this summer. And so transit will be the backbone of the system, but we will be looking to incorporate any and all shared mobility providers, as well as new emerging technologies like connected and autonomous vehicles. And the pilot's going to focus on 7 transit systems in southern Minnesota, plus private providers that are operating there. So if we look at the coverage area, you see our map of the Greater Minnesota Transit Systems, the box at the bottom. What we want to do with this project is not only pilot this technology and this idea, but make it so that it could potentially be scalable. So we want to have a representative group of transit agencies. So we have Rochester and Greater Mankato that are representing our urbanized fixed route services in Greater Minnesota, and then Brown County, Minnesota River Valley, Rolling Hills, Smart, and True Transit, representing different degrees of rural transit agencies. We also already have on board Metro Transit. We'll be integrating their trip planning and ticketing through this platform, so this will be usable when you're visiting the Twin Cities. Jefferson Lines and Land to Air will be on board to provide trip planning for intercity travel. Rochester City Lines, which is a private commuter service, as well as Our Car, which is a community car sharing services, have all signed on board, and we're in ongoing discussions with other providers to bring them on board as well. Importantly, also, we have the support in this project from RouteMatch and CTS software, which were the routing and dispatching software for the agencies, the demand response agencies that were involved in this project. And so they have signed on to support the project and do software integration. One of the things that it makes this, I think, a little bit different in our approach is getting back to what Caroline was saying about the challenge of getting all of these different things to talk to each other. So we are decoupling the consumer app with the API management. So API are all those arrows, all those conversations that are going back and forth between the dispatching software and the data feeds and e-ticketing. And we will have an entity that will be managing all of that independently of the consumer app, which means that that development of communication will be available to other applications. We don't want this to be a closed app and a closed system where you only can get this sort of functionality on the MnDOT app. So if other transit providers and transportation providers want to do service integrations and trip planning, that API will be open and available to other providers. We will also be focusing quite heavily on to increase the ability for all those programs to talk to each other. We'll be focusing on implementing existing and emerging data standards. So we had a webinar last month about GTFS. We'll be implementing feeds for our transit agencies that don't have that already, as well as working to develop a new demand response transactional data spec to make it easier when you're doing the booking of the trip for all these different systems to connect to each other. On the car share side, we'll be working with our car and other car share providers to expand the use of the general bike share feed, which is the bike and scooter share version of GTFS, to allow car sharing to have a more standardized way of interacting with these trip planners. And then there's a brand new data specification being developed that we'll be partnering on called the General On-Demand Feed Specification, which is being designed to help make it easier to communicate information about taxis and TNCs like Uber and Lyft, but may also be very useful and another way for us to convey information about demand response. We will also have a research team looking at the impacts of the MaaS app, both on transit-dependent populations and folks who want to travel through alternative means. And we'll be looking in this coming year to select our vendors and develop the platform and start implementing those new standards with field testing happening in 2022. Beyond that, we'll look at how we could potentially scale this if it is successful to other communities, and we'll be looking for partners who want to expand this kind of functionality. And then looking at other data sets, other ways we can standardize information to make it easier to share. And with that, again, that was a very quick overview, but more will be coming in the coming months. And with that, I would like to bring it back to our speakers and see if folks had any questions. Looks like we had a question. Does this MaaS pilot match RTCC areas? Looks different. Any reason for that? The RTCCs for our speakers, those are regional transportation coordination councils. Those are designed to help coordinate the services of different providers. We are looking at how this overlaps with RTCCs. The particular area where the southern Minnesota pilot is, actually, we don't have, the group has gone through the planning, but they don't have an active RTCCs right now. I think the boundaries of the transit agencies were more the defining concept there rather than the RTCC boundary, which sometimes cuts through transit agencies. And so that was the reason for that. We were looking for partner agencies that were interested in working on this project and saw a need in their community. Let's see, any other questions today?
If any, this is Caroline. Can you?
Uh-huh.
Oh,
yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, wondered is it possible to go back to your slide where you were showing the integration, the API, DSK,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, let me get to that.
Yeah. So so our app, our platform has an API. Can you explain how that, and our problem has been that, many of the, if you're, sometimes that the service provider doesn't want to connect to our API. Is there something different that you're doing with this SDK management?
We still need the partners to be willing.
Okay.
The difference is that by making it more open, that it's not specifically for our app, there's a little bit of give and take. So for example, if Uber wants to do integration with transit ticket sales and planning, it will be immensely easier for them to partner with us because that API will be built and ready to plug in versus them having to go and do a one-off. But in turn, we would want them participating with us and providing their API into our consumer app. So I think the key thing is, in the long term, I don't think our focus is necessarily the app side, that at some point maybe the market develops enough where, kind of like with travel apps like Expedia or Travelocity, you've got other players in that space, but more working on making everything behind the scenes work as seamlessly as possible so you can easily do innovative partnerships and apps.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question from Janet. Will the PowerPoint be available to us? Yes, we'll send out a link after the webinar when the recording has been posted on the transit page at the MnDOT website, and we do also include a copy of the PowerPoints. And with that, we are at time. I really, Adam and Caroline, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. You've given us a lot to think about, and I think, as I mentioned, I think we're facing a lot of the same challenges, so I think this will be probably the first of many conversations about each other's projects, and look forward to talking and hearing more about what you're working on in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you. And with that, we will wrap up and look for in the coming days your invitation for our January webinar, which will be on mobility hubs, and we hope that you will make it to that one as well. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.